This is Bill Ayers on 95.5 PLJ. We're back with our Community Connection show, and we have two guests tonight. Our first one is Judge Judy Kluger. She is the Executive Director of Sanctuary for Families in New York here, and Angelo Rivera, who's the Director of the Economic Empowerment Program for Sanctuary with Families. I want to welcome both of you, and I know that this is Domestic Violence Month. This month, and we're getting towards the end of it. And I also know that on October 24th is a New York City Goes Purple Day for domestic violence, and we're going to talk about that as we go along. But first, I want to start off with Judge Kluger. You are the executive director, and you've been doing this kind of work since forever, many, many years. Tell us a little bit about just how bad it is in terms of domestic violence. Well,
the problem is pervasive. It's worldwide. And just to give you a sense of some of the numbers, there are 2 million domestic violence injuries a year, and 1,300 reported deaths in the United States.
Wow.
Over 10 million children witness domestic violence each year. And, of course, that can result later in life that they're more likely to be victims or perpetrators. And just the dollar cost, which of course pales against the physical and emotional trauma,
sure,
is about almost $6 billion a year. Medical, health services, as well as lost productivity. So it's a situation that has continued for many years.
And I know in New York City you have a number as well that's pretty scary. 230,000 domestic responses to domestic violence by the police, right?
Correct, yes. So that comes down to many each day in New York City.
Okay, so what is happening overall to deal with this? And then let's talk about your programs at Sanctuary for Families.
So, when I started doing this work really as a prosecutor in the 1980s, domestic violence was really not considered much of a societal problem. It existed, it was pervasive, but there were not laws to protect victims of domestic violence. And really organizations like Sanctuary for Families, which was just in its beginning stages then, and other advocacy groups began to sound the alarm that this is something that has to be taken seriously, that there has to be help for victims, there has to be consequences for abusers. So laws have changed over the years. The Violence Against Women Act provided funding to the states from the federal government, as well as some protections for domestic violence victims. So the societal response has certainly evolved over the years, but it still is a problem that exists, as I said, in New York, nationally, and throughout the world.
All right, but New York is sort of a leader in dealing with this. Is that right?
Yes, both in terms of the laws that have been enacted and work like the work that Sanctuary for Families does. And we started as a shelter. Several women in New York City realized that there was no domestic violence shelters for victims fleeing abuse and wanting to be safe from their abusers, and began to shelter people in their homes and then in a church. And then Sanctuary bought a building in the Bronx, which now houses 58 families, and we have 4 emergency shelters in Brooklyn. And the people who were involved in Sanctuary then realized that more than shelter is needed to help victims of domestic violence. They need legal support, they need counseling, they need job training, which is something Angelo will talk about, and they need the shelter that we provide them. So Sanctuary is a leader in this area and really a model for other organizations around the country.
All right, we're talking about Sanctuary for Families, and their website is sanctuaryforfamilies.org, sanctuaryforfamilies.org. You can find out all about them if you go to that. And then you can also call them at 212-349-6009, 212-349-6009. Is that the number to call if people are experiencing domestic violence, or is there a New York City number?
Well, there is we will connect you with all the information for the hotline if needed.
Okay, so there is a hotline.
Yes.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about since you are a lawyer and you were a judge for many years, tell us about the legal center that you have that helps people to deal with so many of these horrible legal issues that can really keep people, especially women and children, from getting the justice that they need.
So we have over 50 lawyers and additional support staff who will assist our clients, everything from going to family court to help a victim get an order of protection, to housing court to prevent them from being evicted from their apartment. We have a huge immigration practice because about 75% of our clients are immigrants. Some are undocumented, and they have certain protections under the Violence Against Women Act that will allow them to be able to have status to stay in the United States. So we have a very large immigration practice. We handle divorces. Anything that a client needs other than criminal matters, our lawyers are prepared to handle. Okay,
let's move now to Angelo Rivera, who's the director of the Economic Empowerment Program for Sanctuary for Families. Angelo, welcome, and tell us a little bit about the programs that you have.
Right, so it's good to be here. Thank you. I think I should start with some first principles in terms of some of the elements we're dealing with. Economic empowerment is really kind of workforce development, and for Sanctuary, it really means a living wage, working within a living wage construct, and taking on the economy from a living wage perspective is very complicated. But I think years ago, back in 2005, when the Economic Empowerment Program was developed, there was a sense that there was something definitive that needed to be done from an economic empowerment perspective for folks. And when Sanctuary took that on, they're really taking on, especially today in terms of the cost of living and the housing crisis and where poverty is in the city, three different things that are really independent of each other. And that's the domestic violence, certainly, but also poverty and homelessness. So the three of them taken together is what our clients face, and that's what we call the nexus. And even from a social engineering perspective, you kind of have to deal with those three things independently. So the first thing is that if someone's taking on living wages for a community that's marginalized or at risk, it's a different order of challenge for us. And we've been doing this for almost a decade now in terms of trying to understand what it is that can can help someone leapfrog the low-wage economy and get into, career track stop. You're not going to start at 50,000 or 60,000, but you can start at 35 or 30, and that is really what we're trying to do. But for folks who have never been in the living wage economy and only know the low wage of the minimum wage society, that could be an issue. So that's really an overriding element for us, is to try to take that on. It makes things much more complicated for us. But it does mean that you're getting into the realm of the knowledge and skills economy. So what Sanctuary has done is really invest in upgrading the knowledge and skills of our clients in a much more substantive way. It takes, 6 months or 9 months or 12 months or even 15 months to get folks to catch up with the economy in terms of literacy, in terms of high school diplomas, in terms of the digital divide, in terms of occupational direction, in terms of professional development, those kind of things. And so that's the long-term engineering challenge we've had. And I think that we've kind of mostly settled that after 8 years. We have a real supply now of folks who are extremely marginalized in many different respects, but they're really, really ready for the business community at the entry level, intermediate level even, in terms of their knowledge and skill levels. And I think I'll leave it there as a start.
So you have a lot of highly motivated people, and you have a whole series of programs that help them to not only deal with the language question, but also with just the whole problem of getting into the workforce when they're starting off. And have a lot of these folks had nothing but sort of a minimum wage job before?
Yes. So a lot of folks, and we, half of our clients are immigrants. So we do have a large half our folks are U.S. born. So we are talking about, in a way, two different perspectives. Obviously, immigrants, or not obviously, but immigrants tend to, even though their circumstances are really difficult in terms of legitimacy for working papers, but that is coming through our legal services, but also, transferable sense of things. If you're an accountant from Nigeria, an accountant from Venezuela, obviously that's different here. Sure. And there are intermediate steps that you have to take. So it's interesting that you mentioned the motivation, because sometimes the motivation levels of immigrants are a little different than folks who are a bit, disconnected or disaffected or alienated from a domestic perspective. So we really have had to develop a program that can work with young people as low as 16 up to 60, and be immigrant and non-immigrant, and to create a unified program that resolves the living wage challenges for all of those different populations. And motivation is really the key. It's interesting you brought that up, because in order to do anything for 6 months or 9 months or 12 months or 15 months, when you're a single mother living in a shelter, you have to really be motivated. In order to be certified, or certified in Excel, certified in Expert Excel, to get certified in medical bill, all of these things mean a level of motivation that doesn't really have to occur in job readiness programs that are maybe 30, 60, 90 days long. So the motivation element is extremely important. But when you trot out a career potential for both immigrants and non-immigrants, they come to terms with that, and they're incredibly, incredibly motivated.
So you have lots of people who are incredibly motivated, and a vast majority of them, I take it, are women, and a lot of them are foreign-born and don't speak the language as English as a first language. So that means a lot of study, a lot of work, but also having kids to take care of at the same time. Do you help these families to take care of their kids while they're going to school?
So, Bill, there are a couple of things. We are able to, our clients who are in domestic violence shelters are able to get child care at those shelters.
Good.
But we also have a child care program at Sanctuary for Families, where if they need some interim assistance till they have child care straightened out, we do have trained child care workers who are in our office who can assist. And, of course, part of Sanctuary's model is a holistic model. So in addition to assisting them in their job training program, if they have legal issues, our lawyers can address them. If they have counseling, that can be addressed as well. And, of course, we do a tremendous amount of anti-poverty work. Angelo's program, one of the things that we do is provide clients with a stipend. Maybe, Angelo, you want to talk a little bit about that extra help that we give our clients that also factors into being able to get child care within the community.
Good. Go for it, Angelo.
Yeah, I just want to be clear on the English part. The program, we have two programs. One is specifically in Spanish. That's for a very small population of folks who are not there yet in terms of reaching intermediate English. But all the folks in the structured English programs, the main programs, have to speak intermediate English, if not higher level English, so that we can really get started. It takes 6, 9, 12 months not to necessarily teach English. That can be a more complicated thing. But certainly to confer the computer certifications and the occupational certifications. So our folks are English ready. They really spend their time on internships and some other things. I just wanted to be clear on that. In terms of the general support, it really takes a lot. We kind of genomed this whole thing years ago, and we kind of came to terms with the fact that there were 28 distinct things that can keep a person from entering the living wage. 28, yeah. So from childcare to transportation to not speaking English to not being able to read to health issues. There were a digital divide. There were actually 28, but once you genome the whole thing and you understand that there are 28, it's much easier to figure out what's missing, because I'm assuming the three of us have most of these things obviously, conquered, but else we wouldn't be here. So it's not that difficult. The important thing is to understand that 1 or 2 or 3 things can sabotage someone doing this, like childcare, like food security.
Sure.
That kind of thing. So the supports are, food, certainly food. We even do Macy's suits. So we have a budget to take folks to buy a black suit so that they're ready for interviews.
Great.
That's important. because we do get really good clothes from volunteers and stuff, but we do need clothes that fit well for interviews. And internships are a big cost. We pay for our interns, so once they're ready at the end of the program to do an internship, they're going to get paid minimum wage. So that's $1,000 a month for 3 months. So that's another cost, but that's very supportive. And those things are what we know is, we call them poverty alleviation. They don't distract you, but they allow you to focus on the things you have to focus on and not worry about, wanting in order, in terms of transportation of food or something, so that you can focus on those 9 to 12 months.
Angelo and Judge Kluger, you don't know me, but I've been involved with an organization I started with the late Harry Chapin back in 1975 called Why Hunger. And one of the things that we've always believed in is that there are really 3 dimensions to fighting hunger. The first one, obviously, is getting people food, and that's what most of the organizations do. And that's very important. It's good, but it's not enough, obviously. And you guys go the second step, the second dimension, that is helping people to get out of poverty, because the root cause of hunger is poverty. And so you help people to get the kind of skills so they can get into the mainstream of American workforce. And that's enormously important. And I think the third one, of course, is something I'm sure you're involved in as well, and that is challenging the structures of society that are unjust, that disempower people, whether it be racism or sexism or just economic injustice. So I'm delighted to be doing a show with 2 people who have spent their lives fighting against all of these very difficult problems, and that you have a very structured and widespread approach to dealing with this. Judge Kluger, let's get back to some of the services that you have, that you talked about a little bit, a clinical program. Obviously, lots of people who suffer from domestic violence have some problems as a result of that domestic violence. How do you help them?
So we have counselors, master's level social workers, 50 of them, who are expert at trauma-informed counseling. And we do individual counseling, group counseling. We have programs for children, and we recognize that the impact on children is profound. And there's also often a break in the relationship between the mother and child, and that needs to be addressed. So we are proponents of what's called the dyadic model, which is doing counseling for moms and children together. And we, if necessary, we will work with consulting psychiatrists for clients who need more than counseling from our social workers. But most of our clients need that support, and we're able to give it to them at Sanctuary. And this is while they may be in the economic empowerment program, while they're getting legal help. Another piece that I just wanted to mention is our systems change advocacy work. And when you talked about you mentioned before how we kind of address the systemic issues that impact on our clients. A big piece of our work is working with local, state, and national government to address the procedural and legal matters, laws in this country that could, and in this state, that impact on our clients. So that is also probably when we talk about four-legged stool, it's the legal services, the counseling, the job training, and our shelter, as well as our systems change advocacy. That is a big part of our work.
While we're talking about systems change, something I love to talk about, maybe you can tell us about some of the changes in laws that you're working on or that you have achieved in the past 10 or 20 years.
So probably the biggest change came out of the Violence Against Women Act, and that was making sure that the requirement that states provide support for clients and that orders of protection are recognized from state to state. In New York State, we were involved in helping change the law so that stalking became a crime. Stalking is often a precursor to more violent acts of domestic violence, and in and of itself, it was not a crime in New York. Many people may not realize that up until last year, if you were 14 years old and a judge agreed you could get a marriage license. If you were 15 or 16 and your parents consented, you could get a marriage license. And we realized that there was something that happens not only in places around the world, but in New York as well, forced marriage. It wouldn't necessarily be marriage at the someone putting a gun to you, but because whether it's religious or culture or just parents forcing predominantly young women into marriage, we were very successful in getting the law changed that now you have to be 17 before you can get a marriage license, and even then it needs judicial consent. So these are things that we heard from our clients. We had a young client who said she had to leave her house because her parents were forcing her into an arranged marriage. So we took this young woman with us to Albany, and she was a strong advocate for the change in the law. As a matter of fact, one legislator said to her that he was leaning the other way, and because he heard her story, he voted to change the law.
Oh, that's a great story. That's a great story.
Yes. And so it's what we hear from our clients, and then we will advocate for the changes necessary.
So the key thing here is listening. And as you listen, people tell you some of the problems that they're having, and some of them you can help through counseling, through job training, whatever. But others are so systemic that you have to try to change the damn laws. And you've done that. That's congratulations. That's a wonderful thing. This is Bill Ayers on New York's 95.5 PLJ, and we're talking tonight on Community Connections with Judge Judy Harris Kluger, who's the Executive Director of Sanctuary for Families, and also Angelo Rivera, who's the Director of the Economic Empowerment Program. And one of the things we should mention, of course, is that October is Domestic Violence Month. And what does that mean, Judge?
So it's Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and it's a recognition that obviously we have to be aware of this issue 12 months out of the year, but we have events, we highlight the particular issues around domestic violence, and I do want to give everyone the New York City hotline number, not just the, you can always call Sanctuary for Families, but in New York City it's 1-800-621-HOPE, and that's 4673. So 1-800-621-4673. So there are events throughout the city and in various communities. Purple is the color that we have as far as Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And I would suggest that all your listeners on October 24th wear purple, and that will show their solidarity with victims of domestic violence.
And so is there anything else happening that day besides people wearing purple?
Yeah, there'll be events at the Family Justice Centers. Each borough has a Family Justice Center in usually it's adjacent to the district attorney's office, but through the mayor's office to combat domestic violence, there'll be events throughout the city recognizing Domestic Violence Awareness Month.
All right, so this is all very important information about domestic violence. And one of the things we want to get back to now are some of these services that Angelo Rivera provides in the Economic Empowerment Program. You kind of went through them very quickly. Tell us a little bit more how this works over a period of time.
So we have a four-phase program. So the first phase is the professional development phase. It's a workforce development workshop. It's about 3 weeks. Then the second phase is a longer 3-month office operations workshop phase where you're getting the certifications and working on literacy. You're coming together as a civic community, and you're being exposed to more professional development over a 3-month period. We're also getting to know you better so that we know how ready you are for the living wage economy, because it takes more than just knowledge and skills. It takes a person and interpersonal skills and that kind of discipline. And then, there's an occupational phase in which we work and raise money for CUNY to pay for CUNY adult education courses, usually one semester, or provide the occupational training in-house to folks that we pay, consultants, And that occupational phase is important because we need an occupational direction in order to enter the career in a meaningful way. And then the last phase is the internship phase. So there's 4 very distinct phases, and they're very, very structured. So you can kind of imagine folks who are living literally in shelter, mainly single moms, who are coming to this program, certainly in the first 2 phases, for 4 months. They have to be there at 9:30 sharp, and it's very enforced. So any problems with attendance and punctuality is going to be a problem early. So from that perspective, it's difficult. Also, if the domestic violence, let's say, happened in Brooklyn, and you have children in school in Brooklyn, then you may be in a shelter in the Bronx. So you can imagine what's happening to folks. They're literally living in the Bronx. These moms have to take their kids to Brooklyn, and then they have to get to a Manhattan site for the training. So the transportation is complex. Yeah, it's very difficult. And then, of course, obviously, in terms of the sense of displacement, the existential sense, the crisis that they're in existentially, and the displacement and the alienation, the sense of knowing that you're living in a shelter with your children at this point in your life as an adult, that's difficult. So in that sense, it's not always intuitive that kind of structure is important, but we find that it is. It can be therapeutic in the sense that you really are, starting over. You are beginning anew in terms of your life. And what better way to do it if you have a sense of belief that a career is possible for you? It is going to take you 9 to 15 months, so it's not going to be, easy. But folks, in many ways, our community, our single moms, they have very little choice, but also in many ways they see it as an opportunity they haven't had, especially if they were, they grew up in New York and they were subject to intergenerational poverty. They weren't socialized in professional development. They didn't have, working folks in terms of living wage economy. This is new to them. So that's what they encounter, and it works. It doesn't work for everybody. I think it does work for about, 60% to 65% of the folks.
So about almost 2/3 of the people who start finish. Is that right?
Well, get ultimately a job, and you get a job through, and the focus is a living wage. So, for instance, we had 99 jobs last year. The average salary was over $17 an hour, and that's extremely important. Those are not necessarily dead-end jobs. Those are entry-level office-type entry-level jobs into finance, into construction administration, into health, and that's all we're here to do. We're not the Soviet Union. We're not going to do a 5-year plan. We're here within 15 months to get to close the gap in terms of the knowledge and skills gap that is now not there in terms of what was there in the past for an economy. There is such a distinctive low-wage economy and living wage economy that Sanctuary has learned that it has to act as an intermediary to get folks into that other side.
Now, how many women, presumably mostly women, how many families are you working with at any one time?
So we started 72 women, all exclusive women, a few months ago in the program, about a month ago, actually. So there are about 65 left, and we'll graduate 60 in January. So that's the attrition rate. We'll go from about 72 to 60 graduates. That attrition is mainly because attendance and punctuality, maybe childcare wasn't, you couldn't figure that out, or for whatever reason, you just couldn't show up on time enough in terms of the program requirement.
Now, you said you give people a stipend. Does that mean to cover transportation and lunch and things like that?
So the stipend is actually much bigger than that. When I first got to Sanctuary, the big challenge was, how are people going to take care of childcare? How are folks going to do things that are meaningful 25 hours a week, 5 days a week with childcare? And what we've learned is that obviously there's a lot of kids in school, so that takes care of childcare. There are tremendous and wonderful after-school programs, so if we can organize that, you can take care of some of that. If you're on public assistance, and 95% of our folks are on public assistance, you are eligible for childcare vouchers, so that'll cover that. So the deficit, we cover the stipend and MetroCard, $250 a week in a monthly MetroCard, which is what, $121, about $360 a month, is enough to cover that little deficit. Family starts to come out of the woodwork. Grandmothers who kind of not necessarily gave up on you, but kind of need support are now there for you to support your kids in terms of taking them to school so you can get to Sanctuary on time, that kind of thing. So, and then we have a child care center at Sanctuary that just can serve the 1% or the 1.5% of folks who are left in the beginning who haven't figured it out yet. So those 72 people represent well over 100 children. Most of them are taken care of in terms of childcare. So that's the stipend, but also there's another element to the stipend. One of the problems and the drivers of poverty, especially in New York, has been, when you're completely dependent on the system, and now you're not just dependent on public assistance and food stamps, you're also dependent on shelter. That's kind of new in terms of the way I grew up in the city. When you're completely tethered to that, obviously there's no disposable income. It's intended that you don't have money at the end of the month. You're there, it's subsistence, it's there so you can survive. But if you untether yourself completely as a single mom and you're working in the low-wage economy, at the end of the month you have no disposable income either because you have to pay for job care. So one of the things that's driving is that you're left to one of those two devices, which is a problem. So what Sanctuary has done is while you're on PA, we give you this extra educational stipend and monthly MetroCard so that it does increase, it does change your disposable income materially so that you can focus on the things that you need to do materially. That's important to us because then we have accountability leverage. Then we kind of have a right to insist that you be on time and that you be certified. And I think that's important in terms of a social contract.
Right. Now, when these people graduate, let's say there's 60 of them that graduate, is that the end of them? You don't see them anymore?
Well, they graduate to phase 2. So to graduate, they finish the professional development course and then the office operations workshop, which means they're certified in all these programs. They're intermediate to advanced and office technology. Then once they graduate, they're eligible to go into phase 3, which is the occupational phase, and then phase 4, which is the internship. So absolutely, they're not done when they graduate from what we call the career readiness training program, the first 2 phases. They now have another semester of stuff and, really important, an internship. And that normalizes the process because obviously internships are a really important part of our employment, how we construct, in terms of how we get folks in the living wage economy. So that opportunity for them is important. Also, it's the 4th phase, and their income goes up because if they're getting minimum wage, they're moving away from just a stipend to about $1,000 a month. So when they get to that point, there's also that reward of more disposable income.
And Bill, the other important piece here is Sanctuary started this program really recognizing that a huge impediment to being safe from your abuser is able to be independent.
Yes.
And you can't be independent without being able to earn a living for yourself and your children. So that was really the underpinning of this program that Angelo then came to us, developed, and really has trained. We're probably, Angelo, right, close to 900 victims, clients since we started. And, Bill, we talk about domestic violence, and I just want your audience to understand it's not just physical abuse. I mean, certainly that is what most of the general public thinks about domestic violence. But at Sanctuary, we look at it much broader. It can be emotional abuse, financial abuse, because the underpinning of domestic violence is really about power and control. So we have a broad definition. Gender violence is our umbrella, so that can include sex trafficking, which has a strong nexus to domestic violence. We have clients who've suffered from female genital mutilation, which is, again, another form of gender violence, and forced and child marriage, as I said. So there are a lot of different ways that people can come to us for a lot of different reasons, but it's important to recognize that domestic violence runs the gamut of a lot of different forms of abuse.
This is Bill Ayers on 95.5 PLJ. We're with our Community Connection show, and our guests tonight are Judge Judy Harris Kluger, and she's the Executive Director of Sanctuary for Families, an organization right here in New York, and Angelo Rivera, who's the Director of the Economic Empowerment Program. And their phone number is 212-349-6009. Their website is sanctuaryforfamilies.org. But I want to give you another important number here. There's a hotline. And let me just say to all of our audience, if you suffer from domestic violence of any kind, and the judge just was talking about the varieties of sexual violence and domestic violence that it could be, you want to give this number a call, 1-800-621-HOPE, 1-800-621-4673. Maybe it's not you, though. Maybe it's somebody in a family or somebody in your neighborhood or a friend. If you know anybody who's suffering from domestic violence, have them give that number a call, 1-800-621-HOPE, and connect them also to Sanctuaries for Families. So we've talked a lot about the program that you run, Angelo, but I want to get back to Judge Kluger and talk about some of the other services that you have. You talked about the clinical program, but you also have a legal center. Tell me about some of the things that come, some of the situations where people come to you and they need help. They don't necessarily need to have a job training, but they need to have these other kinds of legal help.
So we go to the family court to assist our clients in custody, visitation issues, order of protection. We go to housing court, as I said earlier. We also partner with over 1,000 pro bono lawyers from the best legal law firms in the country, in the city, who are able to leverage our work. I mean, we have actually been able to obtain many more assistance because we have the ability for our for the pro bono lawyers to assist us, and all our services are free of charge. We don't have a means test, but most of our clients, the vast majority, are poor, and but for our services, they would not be able to have the assistance that they need. So that's really a rundown of our legal services. And we'll do consultations, we'll go to court for our clients, and basically do whatever they need in the realm of legal assistance.
Let's get back to housing for a moment, because one of the real problems that we have in New York City is that a lot of people get thrown out of their apartments because the landlord wants to kind of spruce it up a little bit and charge twice as much or half again as much or whatever, and wants to get rid of them. So one of the things that the city is trying to do now is to prevent some of that. How is that working, and what do you do to try to help people who are getting dumped out of their apartments?
Well, we several years ago decided to hire lawyers who were expert in work in housing courts, and we help them prevent them from being evicted. We also will force landlords to do repairs in the apartments, and when repairs aren't done for many months, then there is rent abatements. So there is the opportunity to have legal assistance in the housing courts, where generally most of the litigants in housing court are pro se. They have to represent themselves because they can't afford to have a lawyer. And as you can imagine, in New York City, there are about 3,000 domestic violence shelter beds, which is certainly not sufficient, and it's not permanent housing. But we know that about 40% of the people in the homeless system in New York are victims of domestic violence, and that often drives people out of their homes to the homeless shelters.
Wow, 40%. That's
yes.
That doesn't surprise me, but it's certainly a very staggering statistic. What about drug addiction? Because that's another one of the things that puts people into homelessness, and tragically, it happens a lot of times when there are kids involved. How do you help people in that situation?
Well, at Sanctuary, our clients, that is really not an issue. There may be clients who have substance abuse problems, but that is really not in any way a large amount of our client population. And if there is an issue, we would, of course, refer them to services. But as a general rule, in both the homeless system and throughout the city, drug addiction is a driver of homelessness.
Yeah, no question. You mentioned sex trafficking before, and I think that's a little bit surprising to people here in this country, because we think of sex trafficking as something in foreign countries, but it's alive and well here, unfortunately. How much of it do you see, and how do you deal with it?
Yeah, so I think the general view for the population is that sex trafficking is somebody being brought by force from another country to be forced into prostitution here. That does happen, but oftentimes sex trafficking happens from one borough to the other, or from one massage parlor to the other. It really is a function, again, of power and control. And we have seen that our clients may be in an abusive relationship, physical abuse, emotional abuse, and then their boyfriend, partner becomes their trafficker. Mm-hmm. And from our perspective, someone who is forced into prostitution, and oftentimes by maybe somebody who they had an intimate relationship with, that is sex trafficking. And about 10 years ago, we began to handle these cases because of the fact that we realized there was a strong connection between domestic violence and sex trafficking.
So how do you approach that that's different from just the regular, let's train you to get a job?
Well, we try and, one of the first steps is providing people with the services and support to get out of the life. We have been involved in the human trafficking intervention courts around the city. When I was still when I was still a judge, and I was chief of policy and planning for the New York State courts, and I worked in general on problem-solving courts, drug treatment, domestic violence courts, and also a determination was made that people in prostitution should really be treated differently. They should be treated as victims and not offenders. And in each of the boroughs of New York City and in the large cities around the state, these human trafficking courts were created, and the judges, the prosecutors, the defense attorneys, the goal is not punishment, it is services. So Sanctuary for Families is part of that process, and part of the judge's order will be to have a referral from an organization like Sanctuary, and we try and provide the people with the support. Sometimes it is job training, but oftentimes it's a lot of steps before then, counseling, other kinds of support to try and assist the person to leave the life. And the other thing we do at Sanctuary, we do consultation with the trafficking victims to see if they're eligible for immigration relief. There's something called a T visa. These are also remedies under the Violence Against Women Act that allows victims of trafficking and domestic violence to get legal status and work authorization here. So once you have that, then you are not then forced to be in prostitution to earn a living.
I have to admit that I never knew that there were sex trafficking courts. And maybe some of you listening don't know that either, but you should know it, especially if you suspect that someone in your neighborhood or somebody that you know has gotten caught up in sex trafficking. There is a sex trafficking court. There are several of them. Is that right, Judge?
Yes, there's 11 around the state and one in each of the boroughs of New York City. And that is really for people who have been arrested for related prostitution-related offenses and go through the courts, and they know that there is help that can be sought. And even if it shouldn't be that you have to be arrested and go through the court system, if you are a victim of human trafficking, Sanctuary is available to help you regardless of whether you were in the court system. The trafficking courts were created when people were arrested to not treat them as criminals but treat them as victims.
Judge Kluger, you said some very important things here about this whole turnaround that we're beginning to have in our society. of not treating people who are in sex trafficking as perpetrators, but as victims, because they certainly are victims. And I think as soon as you hear the word prostitute, a lot of people think of bad women who are criminals. And this is a turnaround, and it's a turnaround in the law as well, right?
Well, the law still exists that the laws against people in prostitution still exist. Our view at Sanctuary is people in prostitution shouldn't be arrested. They should be referred for services. But while the law is still on the books, we have found a way to provide the assistance in any event. What we have been successful in is changing the laws to punish traffickers. Mm-hmm. And the Trafficking Victims Protection and Justice Act was enacted in New York State so that people who are trafficking, both labor and sex trafficking people, that they are punished.
Great.
And that was, again, based on advocacy that we did and other organizations with us.
Angelo Rivera, I want to get back to some of the work that you do, because you keep using the term living wage job. It's one of my favorite terms as well. And part of that means raising the minimum wage. How have you guys been working with the mayor, with the governor, with other people to try to raise the minimum wage in New York State?
Judy, do you want to talk about our relationship with the city government in that aspect?
Yes, we are, again, advocating always that, our clients are poor, that we want them working, we want them to be able to be off public assistance, and therefore we support and advocate a minimum wage. And in fact, when our clients are in internships, our position is they should be paid. They should be paid $15 an hour, and hopefully the minimum wage in New York will get there.
Well, that's something I think we all believe in, that work in this field, and it could make a major difference, right, and make a major difference for all of your clients as well. I know you said before, Angelo, that the average wage is $15 an hour that they get, but certainly there are a lot of people who don't get that. And if they could be getting $15 an hour, which apparently they will be, what is it, another year or two? Is that what it is?
Well, actually, over the last couple of years, it's actually over $17 an hour is the average.
Our clients.
Your clients, yeah. I know it's over $17 an hour, but there are a lot of people who are not going to be getting $17 an hour. They might be getting $12 an hour, and so
even $17 an hour in New York
doesn't
City
do it.
But the jobs that we're able to place our clients in are at least career track. As Angelo said, the trajectory is that they will be making more, and they are working in major companies in our city, law firms, corporations. We've had a lot of great support from the business community and people that are close to Sanctuary, but are able to connect us to others who are happy to take our clients, because Angelo's point always is we want our clients to be evaluated and interviewed based on who they are, not because they have been victims of abuse.
Exactly.
And they can stand right next to somebody who did not have their history, and we want them to be evaluated and get the job because they deserve it, because of their skills, as opposed to the fact that they have been victims of gender violence.
This is Bill Ayers on 95.5 PLJ. This is our Community Connections show. And we have two guests tonight, Judge Judy Harris Kluger, who is the executive director, but who was, before that, was a New York State Supreme Court justice for 25 years in a domestic violence court and also trafficking intervention courts, and assistant district attorney in Brooklyn. So she has a long history of dealing with these issues. And Angelo Rivera, who's the director of the Economic Empowerment Program of Sanctuary for Families. And as Judge Kluger said before, he brought this program to them. How did you get this idea, Angelo?
So I had the advantage. I started in academia. I was at School of International Public Affairs at Columbia and NYU, and one of the challenges in workforce development is if you start at the job readiness phase, I believe, because I've been doing both for more than 2 decades now, it's very hard to do this work inductively and then to learn what it takes to be more deductive about it. When you start in graduate school and alumni, you're really starting at 60,000 feet, and you begin to understand that a career involves a set of things that poor people can't. You just can't get around it. Poor people, folks who have not been in the economy in a meaningful way, have to figure out how they're going to basically get experience, skills, education, communications, and understand the process just like the rest of us. So that is the challenge in terms of beginning this work, not from a job readiness perspective or from a workforce development perspective, but to come at it from a higher level of complexity and then to begin to adapt it so that some of the premises and the principles of what a career is are accessible to folks who have not been socialized in it. So that definitely, in terms of where the idea came from, that has really been important to me in terms of now trying to re-engineer what it takes, at 60,000 feet to evolve and to maintain a career, and how to make that accessible to folks who have not been in the economy in a meaningful way. So that was an advantage. And of course, Sanctuary is a place that invested and was ready for the long haul. It's just very rare for an institution, a nonprofit, to take on the living wage challenge because it's so complex and so expensive, and it is an engineering feat. So Sanctuary really has taken this on for 8 years. And actually, we're in a really good place now because we know how to do it. We know how to, quote unquote, develop the workforce. We have not had the demand side interfere with that. Now that we have a sense of of clients that are ready for the living wage economy, now we're in the new engineering phase, which is now let's plug them in. Let's plug them into the demand side. But the real challenge in this business for poverty itself has been to be confused about, working with the demand side and the supply side at the same time, and as well as dealing with all the issues that our clients and that people deal with anyway. So to Sanctuary's credit, they really focused on what was needed, and that was workforce development, how to develop the workforce, how to get them ready for a living wage career, and they've done that. I think they've done that successfully.
Has the turnaround in the economy helped you in getting folks into positions like this?
I would imagine so. It's still a struggle because the handover from the supply to the demand side is now one of our challenges. But obviously, with the 4% unemployment rate in New York City, it's really helpful. And of course, the board and Sanctuary's connections are have been really important because still networking is still part of how do we get jobs. It's also part of the privilege element in our society. If you're privileged, if you can plug your kids in and family members into internships and things like that, then they have an advantage. Also, they're socialized in the sense of how those advantages work. The question is, can you confer that to a population that has not had that opportunity?
Sure.
And Sanctuary, I think, has proven that it can do that. And the board, in particular, has stepped up. We also have what's called a career advancement network made of board-level folks and other volunteers who really work with us in terms of that handover. Once a person's ready in terms of knowledge and skills, now they need to be handed over to the opportunity mix, and that's really what we're trying to do now.
Okay, I have a challenge for you for the next step here. You came up with this, and you found the perfect organization to do it with that has all of these resources, all of these connections, all these wonderful people, and the resources financially to pull this off. So it's worked on a certain scale. Has anybody come to you, or have you gone to anybody and say, hey, we got a great model here. How would you like to try to replicate this? Are you at that stage yet?
Judy, do you want to?
Yeah. Well, a couple of things. First of all, just to know, it's an expensive program.
Right.
We're a not-for-profit, and like every other, we have to raise the money each year to support the program.
Right.
So we're about 60% funded by government contracts, and the rest by foundations and private donations. So we go to government to ask them for funding for this program. And the unfortunate thing is that we've gotten funding for it through HRA, the Human Resources Administration in New York City. and some government funding, but there isn't enough government funding for workforce programs for women with children. So I think that's important for your listeners to know. There are programs are generally geared, government programs are geared to the formerly incarcerated, veterans, youth at risk, youth aging out of foster care, all populations that need to get workforce training. And in no way am I suggesting that anything be taken away for them, but
Sure.
there has to be a recognition that women who are victims of domestic violence, most of our clients have children, that needs to be supported with a more government funding. But in direct answer to your question, yes, we our model is something that we wherever we can, we find ways to for people to learn about it. Both Angelo and myself speak to a lot of different organizations, and we think we have a terrific model, but it takes the right kind of vision, and also it takes funding. It costs us about $10,000 per client in this program to get them through the program,
Wow.
get their certifications, for the internships, and the support they have to get a job. So in some respects, it's a small amount to pay for someone to be independent and off public assistance, but in terms of raising the money to support the program, it's a lot of money.
It sure is. One thing we haven't touched on yet is this terrible statistic of 1 in 3 teenage girls who suffer from some sort of abuse or trauma from their dating partners. Now, that, of course, can lead to people getting into a long-term relationship that becomes abusive. Do you find that that's the case with the women that you're talking to?
Yeah, some, it does start early, unfortunately, not always,
Sure.
if it probably can be stopped early if there's intervention in the schools. I think that if we're talking about future generations, it is really important to get young men and boys to understand we are basically a patriarchal society.
Yes.
And over the many millennia, there has been a sense that in some cases, young boys they're not trained to commit domestic violence, but there's an element of toxic masculinity, and there's this, boys don't cry, and
The macho
don't
thing.
be a sissy, and you're acting like a girl, and that doesn't always translate into violence, but it does translate into a sense of being better than someone and being better than the girl or the woman in your life, and I think we need a whole societal change in how we look at gender and how we look at the relationship between boys and girls and men and women.
I think that's beginning to happen, but it can't happen quick enough.
Right.
This is Bill Ayers, and we have had a wonderful conversation tonight with two people who have dedicated their lives to help people who are suffering from domestic violence. They work for an organization called Sanctuary for Families. Their website is sanctuariesforfamilies.org. Their phone number is 212-349-6009. And their names are Judge Judy Harris Kluger, who is the Executive Director, and Angelo Rivera, who is the Director of the Economic Empowerment Program. And they want you to have another number that everybody should have. It's a hotline number, 1-800-621-HOPE. Or you can call it 1-800-621-6479. 63. Let me say that again. 1-800-621-4673. 4673. That's a hotline for domestic violence. I want to thank you both for the dedication that you've had for all of these years, and thank you for being with us tonight.
Thank you, Bill.
Till next
you,
time,
Bill.
this is Bill Ayers, and I wish you much peace and love and hope. That's something we all need a lot of.